Okay, next up we have Matt Cutler from Block Native to talk to us about the pre-chain layer as a public good. Hi, Matt. Welcome.
Hi, thanks, Cindy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, take it away.
You bet. So I should be sharing slides. There we go. Hey, everybody. I'm Matt. I'm founder and CEO of Block Native. We specialize in the pre-chain layer, sort of everything that happens to Web3 transactions before they go on chain. And it turns out that's a whole bunch. And we are working on raising awareness of this because it's misunderstood or sort of poorly exposed out there. And we really believe it's a public good, and we're going to talk a bunch about that. So Web3 transactions, let's just sort of talk about them quickly. We have this expectation of like it's this really easy thing. Users have intent to transact, and it goes to finality, right? Straight line, very easy to do. But it's quick, secure, immutable, and it's in this really open, transparent, and equitable fashion. But if you've ever done a Web3 transaction, you know it's not really how it goes. It's not really how you feel inside. And that's certainly not what you hear from others who are new to the ecosystem. Instead, the reality is a lot like this. It just feels really messy. It feels very anxiety inducing. There's lots of issues that can come up. And the real interesting question here is sort of, oh, and by the way, this is all of the things that can happen while your transaction is pending. You get unequal settlement. You can be subject to hacks and exploits. You have anxiety, and the networks themselves have congestion that's opaque about what's going on. And there are all sorts of predators in the dark forest that can sort of prey on your transaction and basically cause bad things to happen or get a less equitable settlement than you expect in the first place. And the question here is sort of, why is this the case? And it turns out the why is this pre-chain layer. It's all the things that happen to your transaction between the intent, which is off-chain, and the finality, which is on-chain. And we at Block Native talk about what we call the Web3 transaction lifecycle. We've actually published blog posts on this that says, hey, there's a whole series of discrete steps that every transaction goes through between its intent and finality. You have to compose the transaction you want to conduct. You have to price or set the fees for that. You then want to preview that transaction, say, if I were to submit this, what would happen? You then transmit it to the network. There's a whole variety of ways to do that. You monitor when it's pending and in flight, and then you get some sort of confirmation of finality, whether it's confirmed and go on chain or it's failed or dropped or stuck or otherwise. And it turns out that this real-time layer is quite different than the on-chain layer. It's a real-time layer. The chains themselves move forward like a watch. They click, click, click forward. In the case of Ethereum, it's about every 13.5 seconds right now. Post-merge, it'll be every 12 seconds. Other blockchains go slower, like Bitcoin. It's about every 10 minutes. Other blockchains like Solana or Avalanche go faster. But at the end of the day, you have this like click, click, click like a watch. The pre-chain layer does not work that way. Anyone in the world can submit a transaction at any time, and they often do. So it really is a sub-second real-time data layer. It's also mutable. Because there's no consensus that has been formed, you can change things in the pre-chain layer. You can overwrite transactions. You can replace them. You can cancel them. And so the rules of the pre-chain layer are entirely different than the rules of on-chain. And there's no such thing as like a single pre-chain layer, or often it's called the mempool. Because there's no consensus, it's like a global fabric, and that fabric exists in all the computers that make up the chain, and they may be wildly in disagreement. That the fabric is lumpy, and particularly under periods of congestion, there's no common view of what's going on there. Now, the reality here is it's really hard to work with this stuff. It's hard to capture it because it's this global data layer and it's real time. It's hard to work with it because you get very sparse data off of the mempool and pre-chain layer, and there's no standard infrastructure for making sense of this. And so this is an example. I actually asked a member of our engineering team to say, hey, can you just give me a dump if you were running your own node and you were to say, ask the node for mempool data? This is basically what you get. Just line after line, millions of rows per day of this sort of data that, unless you're obviously fairly technical, you need to, most individuals, most entities don't have the infrastructure or wherewithal to make sense of this. Now, the challenge, of course, is that this leads to a whole bunch of big problems. You have poor Web3 UX, you can't tell what's going on. It's inefficient setting of fees. You miss opportunities and all the risks, hacks, and exploits that we talked about earlier. The pre-chain layer is unavoidable. It impacts everything. It impacts every transaction, every user, every wallet, every dApp, every protocol, every L1 and L2, et cetera. That there's no escaping that if you're on a public blockchain network, if you're trying to get on-chain, you have to go through the pre-chain layer, because if users can write directly to the chain, you don't have a blockchain at all, you have a database, because there's no consensus being formed. And so this is a big challenge. It impacts the entire ecosystem. And what it does is there's this opacity in the pre-chain layer that creates haves and have-nots. There are actors out there who work with this data. There are actors out there who act on this data. And if you are not one of those actors, it's like playing soccer against a team that can see 5 seconds into the future. It'd be a pretty frustrating game because you're at a strategic disadvantage against the folks who are out there. And so this is why we think the pre-chain layer is really critical for everyone to be aware of, and why we think it is a public good to have equitable access to it. So without it, it creates the conditions for on-chain inequity, which is structurally bad. You basically create disparities in participants in the network that can then accrue economic value in unequal fashions, which can then be a force of centralization. And so we and others feel very strongly that this is something that more people need to be aware of and more people need to participate in. Now, as a public good, we believe that by providing equitable access to the pre-chain layer and tooling that people can work with easily, it levels the playing field for all network participants. So at least everybody's working with the same set of data, and everybody has access to the same set of tools so they can behave accordingly. They can transact with confidence and get the settlement that they expect. And so we at Blocknative actually do this stuff. So this is the before picture was what you get for mempool data. This is an example of a tool that we provide. It's freely accessible, called Mempool Explorer. Basically, there's this big backend which is ingesting all this data, and then we're providing APIs and tooling to make it easy to work with. So you get well-structured JSON here. Here we're looking at a series of major DEXs. We provide full tooling for filtering this stuff. So what you're looking at right here is actually filtering on a contract call method name of Uniswap v2, and we decode the ABI. So basically, it's still relatively technical in nature, but it's just vastly more accessible and vastly easier to integrate with projects, with dApps, with wallets, with protocols, or for traders by using this class of infrastructure. And so we've been offering this for a while now, and we just want to make sure that more people are aware of it and it's available to more ecosystems. So by definition, the pre-chain layer is pre-consensus, which basically makes it so there's no verifiable truth. So you can have various perspectives on the pre-chain layer and the data that may not agree, but are actually accurate, because depending on where in the network you're looking at things, you may see different results. This makes it difficult to then decentralize. Where we want to go with all of this is we're a private company that's privately backed. We have commercial tools, but what we want to do is for the ecosystems that we support is decentralize these capabilities so that they can be community owned and community governed moving forward. But we have this challenge of operating in the pre-chain layer, and can it be decentralized? And we think that it can be decentralized, but on a progressive basis, so that you don't need to decentralize all the things all at once, but we very much want to lead the dialogue and lead the charge in doing so that various Web3 ecosystems can have this as part of their core fabric, and infrastructure providers like Blocknative can participate in that. So what we're trying to do is get folks involved in this. This is why we're here at the World Crypto Economic Forum. We want each one of you to go hands-on with the pre-chain layer, and we want you to get involved with this effort of progressive decentralization. We think the pre-chain layer needs you, each and every member of this ecosystem, because basically the Web3 ecosystem needs you. That the pre-chain layer affects everything across the board. We're pursuing progressive decentralization of this infrastructure, and we're forming the core working groups right now. And so we're forming working groups on, look, how do we create open source protocols around this stuff? How do we create reference implementations of those protocols? What might community governance look like? How do we create aligned incentive models so all the various actors who participate in these open source protocols can be compensated appropriately? And how do we pursue shared ownership? This is going to take on renewed urgency as Ethereum itself goes through the merge, and some of the new changes that are going to be happening underneath the covers as a result of that, we think really are highly constructive to this effort. And this is why we're trying to start these conversations now and do so in an open fashion. If you are interested in being a part of this, if you're intrigued by these possibilities, please fill out this form. It's blocknative.com/prechain-working-group, and then we'll have somebody get back to you. And if you're just more broadly interested in this category, very much encourage you to check out our blog, check out our tooling, because it's the best and easiest way to go hands-on with pre-chain data. And that is exactly 10 minutes. I'm Matt Cutler, and that was a session on the pre-chain layer as a public good. And again, thanks so much for having me here as part of the World Crypto Economic Forum.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was really interesting information. If you get to stay back, I think there's some questions for you in the comments, and really appreciate it.
You bet. I'll jump in the comment stream now. Happy to be here.
Perfect.